Tell me about some of your favorite parts about being in social work and being a counselor. Yeah. Wow, the
I
face
love
just
them
lit up.
all.
Wow.
I feel so, it's so cheesy, but I feel so lucky to have my job. I'm like literally constantly learning. I'm always taking classes.
Welcome back to a Modern Men podcast. I'm your host, JD Farrell. And I know you're not used to seeing me on Wednesdays now, but like we said, we just debuted a Modern Woman podcast with Brianna Donnell, and she will be having her podcast released every Monday, and I will be coming to you every Wednesday. And then we got Fargo Watch Party coming to you every Friday, still hitting hard, season 2 of that with Stephen Merriweather. So hope you like that content. I'm excited for you to listen to this podcast today. I'm speaking with Alyssa, who is a licensed counselor practicing out of New York City currently. And she has a lot of patients a lot of her patients deal with trauma and ruptured relationships. And she talks about her experiences with her clientele and some coping skills she gives them, and maybe some coping skills she would give you, or maybe some of those out there experiencing some higher levels of trauma. So I really hope you enjoy that. Before we get into her interview, I really want to just talk about, I don't know, I just want to have a moment of silence. The Derek Chauvin trial did just complete, and I'm very happy that he was convicted of all 3 counts, but it's just a start. And it's not an attack on police, because everyone has to do their job. I just hope keeping people accountable leads to reform, because that's all I really want. I want to change what policing is. I want to change what community is and what our neighborhoods are, because America is better when we're all better. And so yes, it is a start, and prison is not a place that anyone deserves to go to, because the prison system is completely messed up. But too many black, brown, yellow, whatever ethnicity, race, creed, anyone, even white people, are getting harmed by the police, and that needs to change. Yes, a disproportionate amount of people of color, but the idea and the systematic policing and racial inequalities that are in our community, those need to change. And that's kind of just my point on why things like the Derek Chauvins of the world need to be prosecuted. So that's enough on that. I really hope you enjoy my interview today. Here it is. How are you doing, Alyssa?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. Been an early morning. I'm excited. You nervous?
I am nervous. I've never done podcasting before, so a little nervous, but fine.
No, see, just be yourself, just talk, you'll be good. Welcome back to a Modern Men podcast. I'm your host, JD Farrell, and today I'm so excited to be joined by Alyssa Ashenfarb. So how you say your last name? Did I get that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. How are you doing today?
Well, how you doing?
Great. Yeah. I love the vibe just in the background of your office. It looks very comforting and very welcoming.
Thank you. I didn't have any pictures up there up until maybe 2 weeks ago. It was just a blank slate and it was a little bleak. So I thought I'd get some stuff.
Okay. So I think that they just knew this was happening. That's what the sign.
Totally.
So I want to start off by asking a little bit about your background, educational background, and kind of what led you to your passion for counseling, and what kind of counseling do you
Sure.
do right now?
Sure. So my educational background, I have my degree in social work. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. Most of my training is in clinical trauma.
Okay.
And then recently, within the last couple of years, I've gotten a little more interested in psychodynamic therapy. So it's more interpersonal, more relational, um, and less skill based, more exploring.
Okay. And have
Yeah.
you always wanted to get into counseling, or did you stumble into it?
That's a good question. This is always a tough question for me. So I first got into social work specifically when I was working at a camp for kids with cancer in high school. And I found myself really, it was actually a camp for kids with cancer and their siblings. So I found myself really interested in the dynamic between the siblings and the kids with cancer, and then the dynamic between the siblings and the parents. So
Okay.
that's when I first started getting interested in I guess relational work and counseling. But then I went to social work school and I really thought I was going to do medical social work
Okay.
and just found myself so much more interested in um, like PTSD, trauma, and all. I started realizing that was why I was interested in the siblings in the first place, is
Mhm.
because of all the trauma symptoms they were experiencing as a result of being a sibling of a kid with cancer.
And so a lot of your work, you said, consists of a lot of trauma patients, a lot of relational work, is right, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And what are some of the misconceptions of trauma, I guess? What do you consider trauma, I guess, to start with?
hmm That's a great question. So typically, for my mind goes in 100 different directions for this question. So there's big T trauma, which
Yeah.
is usually single event, and it really overwhelms the body's capacity to cope. So typically there's a really big event like rape or sexual abuse, which can be chronic, but sometimes there's like one event that really hones in there. And it starts causing things like flashbacks or hypervigilance. And these are symptoms of PTSD. And then there's more little t trauma, which is longer term, typically relational, which is usually the work I do, and can be more like, I think of systemic issues like racism or poverty. And then I also think of things like domestic violence or interpersonal issues or emotional abuse.
Yeah. As well. Uh, so most of the people that you see usually deal with relational issues and trauma. They both of these things go hand in hand, correct?
Totally.
Yeah.
It's a little hard to differentiate between relational issues and trauma, but yes, I would say that
Mhm.
both of them do
Like,
experience both.
do you think people usually minimize that subject? And I guess maybe the
Totally.
trauma associated with those relationships, just the common ones.
Yeah. So I guess when you say experiencing interpersonal issues, tell me a little bit more about what you mean.
Okay. I'm maybe problems making relationships with friends and family, or maybe broken relationships because going through different foster homes or something, like those people who maybe have trouble connecting and connecting with loved ones, connecting with friends, things like that.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a great question. Basically, the way I assess for that stuff is there's two different facets of trauma. There's the hypervigilance and the hyperarousal, and then there's the hypoarousal. And the
Okay.
hyper is more like a sensitive nervous system. You're really on edge. You're really anxious. You don't trust people. You're hypervigilant to the people around you. And then there's the hypoarousal, which is more disconnection, isolation, numbness, dissociation. So there are people who will kind of numb out and not realize what a big deal. They'll come in and they'll say, I'm lonely and I don't know what's going on. I have people around me, um, but I just don't feel connected. And you start to realize that they're like feeling really numb in situations, or they're feeling
Mhm.
disconnected as a protective skill. So they do minimize it. They're like, it's not me, it's the people around me. They just like don't know me well enough. And then you start to explore and you realize that they don't let them know them well enough because there's fear involved. They want connection and they're afraid of connection. And then there's the hyperarousal, which I notice is less minimized because it's more apparent. It's really anxious. It's really like, I need people around me. So I'm going to tell them absolutely everything about me and hope they stay. And then if they don't, I feel abandoned. And then they're like, I'm being vulnerable. Everybody's telling me to be vulnerable. I don't know what the problem is. But it's more like an anxious vulnerability, and it's more like compulsive, trying to get people to stay.
Yeah. And do you think these are exhibited in like people exhibit both of these things, or just usually one of them?
Sometimes they go back and forth, but usually it's just one of them.
Just one.
Yeah.
Oh,
Hmm.
okay. All right.
Yeah.
And I guess what are some of the main problems of trauma that some of your clients personally have been going through? Obviously, no names and stuff like that, but
Yeah.
just as
That's a good
minimal as
question.
small and as large as the problems.
That's a good question. So mostly, I think my clients, I see people mostly in their 20s and 30s. So it's a lot of dating issues.
Yeah.
I notice that my clients will start dating somebody and want to keep the connection so badly because there's been so much abandonment in the past or so much interpersonal turmoil that they're like, this person is finally going to be the one. I need this connection. And they'll kind of selectively inattend to the red flags that are showing up in the relationship. So, for example, they'll say, oh, my friend saw the guy I'm seeing kissing somebody else. But it's not a big deal because he said that's how they do it in their country they're from, or that's just the way he interacts with people in his building. Like he gets really close with them and then they kiss hello, goodbye. And it's kind of just like a selective inattention to these things that are actually, if if these people did have the ability to trust their own gut or be more connected with their body, they'd be able to tell, oh, something's not right here.
Oh,
Yeah.
and I bet that's really hard dealing with that clientele in New York too, where just, yeah, the variety, and then everyone, of course, trying to find someone, just so much out there and everyone's dating constantly.
Totally. Especially with like all these issues of abandonment and
Yeah.
disconnection. Like I think the nature of dating in New York is so surface and so disconnected and
Yeah.
so there's a meme circulating and it's like first step is sex, next step is something else, and then the last step, like third base, is talking about your childhood traumas. And I was like, this is so New York. Like this feels so New York because it's so surface until it's not surface,
Yeah.
and then it's really intense, and then it can get really, it's like that love bombing, like volatile.
And that's what you've been looking for, so you just latch onto it because, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Like they hold on so tight to these things because they want to believe them.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess now we're dealing with a little bit more, talking about the serious parts of trauma. And do you think, is it healthy for people to kind of black out the memories of those past situations? Is that healthy?
That's a good question. So it's a tough question because they block them out because they're so painful.
Yeah.
So in order to be a functioning person every day, you can't hold on to like the most traumatic thing that happened to you. So blocking it out is called dissociation and repression. So they just like don't remember. Um, but what we see winding up happening is when they don't cognitively remember it, they physically remember it and emotionally they remember it, and it comes out in different ways. So it'll come out, for example, if a child was um, had an instance of sexual abuse and they don't really remember it, they wind up seeking it out in later relationships. So like not actually seeking out sexual abuse, but that power and control dynamic you find
Okay.
is so much more common in people who have been abused, and even if they don't remember it.
Yeah. So if you don't address it consciously, your subconscious will inherently be seeking that out.
Yes,
Oh.
we have a very finely attuned unconscious, unfortunately.
And I guess what would you say is the best way to go about addressing those issues, that maybe those repressed memories that are too difficult to deal with on a day-to-day basis? Or how do you go about clients? How
Hmm.
would you go about getting them to address those issues?
So I notice people don't really come in with complaints about repressed memories, probably just because they don't remember it. So what they'll come in is complaints about 100 other things.
Mm-hmm.
And like repression is not as common as like the general idea of trauma. So I've only had a couple clients with repressed memories. But I had one client who like started having dreams about her experience. Um, and then came in and said, I'm having these dreams. I don't know where they're from and I'm terrified.
Yeah.
And then with further exploration and like, you have to feel safe in the relationship, she was finally able to get to like, oh, maybe I was sexually abused. but how you deal with it. So I'd say that first, developing safety and trust in the therapeutic relationship is number one. Remembering that like connection for them in the past has been really scary. It's led to abuse. So feeling connected to your therapist can feel really threatening even. So it's a really, it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
You want to build trust, you want to build a relationship, and eventually, usually they're able to, if there is something there, either come up with it or understand that their symptoms are a result of something that they don't remember happened. And then work with it from there. It's a lot of like body coping and a lot of learning to trust your symptoms. If something tells you there's danger, there's probably, or there could be danger, unless you're hypervigilant, in which if your body says there's danger, there's probably not danger.
Yeah.
So you want to do a lot of coping skills and just get them to figure out where they are on the spectrum of hypo to hyper aroused.
All right. All right. Great segue. We're talking about coping skills, and now we're talking about those situational coping skills.
Mm-hmm.
All right. For someone who maybe were in a fire, maybe had childhood abuse, sexual abuse, and that past experience they're not allowed to go back into those situations without having an external reaction. I guess, how would you deal with those people, or how would you allow them to cope with those situations?
They're not allowed. Tell me a little bit more about what you mean when you say they're not allowed to go back into the situation.
Not or maybe mentally, or there is a reaction, a physical reaction to them going back to that situation. Someone who was burned previously around fire, someone who was abused, now not wanting to be in, and that affects relationships with a future partner. Same thing from childhood abuse, then not being able to maybe be touched in any type of way because of that type of abuse. And
that's such a good question. I see that constantly. Yeah. People who have been abused, especially remembering that connection, it's really human to want connection.
Yeah.
But when connection is dangerous, you have a drive to get connection and you have a drive to pull away from connection. So this is what causes all the turmoil in relationships and in people's lives who have experienced trauma. Yeah. But basically if we're thinking of like concrete coping skills, there's 3 categories. There's cognitive coping skills, which is using the power of the mind to kind of think about category games, or what else is a silly one? Like naming a fruit for each letter of the alphabet, like really just going through and finding silly things that will distract your brain and make you stop ruminating.
Okay.
Next is emotional coping. So that's talking about reaching out to a friend who you really trust, or giving yourself a hug, or remembering a mantra. So we'll come up with mantras that feel safe for clients that they can go over.
Yeah.
And the last is physical. So physical can be working out, but it can also be using your senses. So one my clients love is going through your 5 senses. So naming 5 things you see in the room, 4 things you feel physically on your body, 3 things you hear around you, 2 things you smell if you can, and then 1 thing you taste if you can. So really grounding your mind back in your body.
Okay. I guess because that's what happens when they're going back in that situation. It's like an out of body experience, and they're not in the present. They're going back to that moment and those grounding techniques. So okay.
That's really what a flashback is like not so much a cognitive memory, but a full body visceral response.
Yeah.
So instead of one also that's really helpful for my clients is reminding them what year it is, what day it is, how old they are, and the amount of control they have now versus how little control they had when they were a 7-year-old and like totally subject to their parents' whim.
Yeah. And that's interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on to a little bit of some ruptured relationships now. All right. All right. And a lot of the people, you said you deal with people that are dating, and they have, I guess, it's not a problem making relationships. It's a problem kind of seeing the relationships, or kind of removing themselves from the picture and seeing it from a third person point of view. Did that make sense of me explaining it?
So, I think it made sense to me, like kind of looking at it objectively versus getting caught up in the need.
There we go. I couldn't get the word out.
That's okay. Yes. So I guess I see a little bit of both. I do see a problem making relationships for clients, especially who are like so caught up in their defenses that they don't even realize that they're defensive. And I see this more often with men than I do women. Men who are more objectifying or more, I see it a lot with men who have childhood trauma in terms of physical abuse, mostly with their father. So they'll get really caught up in like lying in order to get out of fearful situations because it reminds them of being really afraid when they were younger, and that's how they got out of situations that were scary to them. So I see it harder for men in terms of making relationships, but for women, I see once they're in relationships, it's really hard to maintain it.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm like totally sweeping generalization. It happens
Yeah.
for both genders, both. But this is just more often what I see. For women, I find that they get really anxious and they find coping skills that have worked for them in the past to hold on to their relationship. So for example, I have one client who like wipes out her whole personality and just agrees with everything her partner says, or she's just not opinionated. There's no life to her. She just is very small and very bland because when she was younger, when things were scary for her, she couldn't disagree with the people around her. She would get really hurt.
And I
So
would
yeah,
say,
it comes out in both ways.
as an independent woman, do you see her as a strong woman individually? And then once she's in a relationship, it's like she completely crumbles to.
Totally. She is such a badass. And I even see her as strong in the relationship because when you really think about it, these skills are so adaptive. They're survival skills.
Yeah.
And if she didn't do that when she was younger, she would have been severely abused, like probably even more than she's already been abused. So like that I see as like, I literally get goosebumps. Like that I see as the most strength. And it's really why I went into social work or trauma work, is because I see how all these symptoms can be, while they are so painful, are also so adaptive and helps them survive.
Because step one is just surviving, and then you can, all right, let's hone those skills in and like improve and work on them. Yeah.
Right. Like that Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. And with a lot of the guys, you say a lot of women just can't think objectively. I guess how do you get them to start to think objectively from their perspective? I can't talk this morning.
That's okay. You said it was an early morning today.
Yeah.
That's a good question. So that's when the therapeutic relational work really comes in. I'm really apt to bring myself into the room. And if a client so for example, this is actually a male client, but I had a client the other day who our session went a couple minutes over and he panicked and he was like, oh my God, like you must be so annoyed at me. I can't even believe I did that. I went over our session and it's kind of bringing myself into the room. I remember, like in that moment, what he was feeling was scared. Yeah. He was having like a kind of a visceral flashback of like, am I going to get hurt here? And is she going to be disappointed in me? Is she not going to like me anymore? So I bring in a new experience for him and introduce him to a different level of safety. So what I wind up saying is, you can trust that I'll hold my boundaries. If something makes me uncomfortable, I will tell you. But I'm okay with going 2 minutes over the time of our session every now and then. It happens.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, I didn't even think that you would be okay with that. It didn't even like cross his mind that would be fine. So I guess the answer to your question is just really reintroducing new experiences of safety during the moments of fear that they wouldn't even conceptualize because they've never experienced it.
And I guess that would be the same way for, you're saying, the people who don't want to open up as much. Same thing. You're trying to conceptualize new ways of thinking, open a new safe space for them that they were previously wouldn't visit.
Yes. For the clients that don't want to open up, it's a lot of patience, a lot of sessions about next to nothing, and then bringing it to their attention and saying like, hey, I've realized we've only talked about movies for the last 2 months. Like, I'm wondering if there's a different reason you came into therapy or something else you want to talk about. And sometimes I get defended and then I know I'm moving too fast. Yeah. And sometimes I open up and then I know that I'm in the right place.
See, and I guess I'm kind of curious to those clients because I guess they come because they know something's wrong and they know they're not right, even though they don't want to open up. Would you say that's?
so common. Those clients usually come in for loneliness. They'll say, I am feeling lonely across the board. I feel disconnected and I have no idea what's going on. And they'll say it in their first session and then they don't say it again for months. And then you just have to wait until they're ready. Because if you said right then and there, well, you're avoiding connection, they'd be like, no, I'm doing everything I can for connection. I'm talking about movies. I'm talking about things you're interested in. I'm trying to like engage you. And they don't realize that that's like a very surface level connection. There's so much that's missing because deeper connection is terrifying for them.
Huh. And if they're not doing that with you, definitely not doing it in their personal lives. And
Totally. Yeah. Like it's so funny because like cognitively, oh, therapy is supposed to be safe, but emotionally gaining that trust takes forever. So you just have to be patient.
And this is kind of, I guess, leaning on that same kind of subject and like insecurities. I guess, how often do you think your clients are aware of those? Because obviously that's a main part of working on relationships with people, with yourself. Do you think a lot of people are self-aware of their own insecurities?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I'd say it's probably split across the board. Like 50-50. Some people are, I notice the clients that say they're really self-aware are usually the least self-aware clients, just because it's like a different type of self-awareness. And a lot of the time they misconstrue anxiety as self-awareness. So they'll say like, no, I'm always thinking about the people around me, but actually they're just thinking about how the people around them perceive them. And it's really just a projection of how you think that people perceive you. And it's not really self-awareness. It's just like, I'm so scared all the time.
Yeah. Because I didn't realize how important that is. And I feel like that's a big issue that we just forget for people to address. Because the younger I was, I remember, I didn't think adults had insecurities. And then as you become a young adult, you don't think older adults have insecurities. And the older you get, you're just like, no, they're always here. And as long as you're working on them, addressing them, that's, I feel like, one of the best ways to kind of work on yourself.
Totally. For the clients, like they'll say, the ones who come in saying I'm really self-aware but have all these insecurities that they don't know about, as they shift, they'll be like, oh, it turns out I'm not self-aware and I have all these insecurities. And now that I'm realizing them, I guess the only thing to do is to work on them, even though it's uncomfortable. But they usually make a lot of progress.
And the hypo and hyper, all these people, how are they willing to put in the work? I know they're coming to therapy. I mean, and that's only, I don't even know how often they see you, whether it's once a month, once every 8 weeks, once a week, but are they trying to put in the work outside of therapy as well and do stuff on their own? Or how often are they just thinking they can show up and you're supposed to fix them?
Yeah, those are tough clients. I see my clients once a week, mostly. I have a couple of biweekly clients. Most of them are willing to do the work. There are a few every now and then who get really frustrated with me because I haven't fixed them yet. And that's a bummer, but it also gives me really good information because it tells, this again is like people who come in with loneliness, who are typically avoidant, and who don't want to, or who like do have a pattern of blaming other people for their problems. Which again is a coping skill and a defense, because anything else would be really scary and would carry a lot of other feelings that come with it. So I find that everybody is able to work on their own shit in their own way. But some people, it takes a lot longer than others.
How do you talked about the owning, how do you get people to own their part in whatever problem they have with someone without, especially because they're coming to therapy and they're being vulnerable, without making them even more like the bad guy?
This is something I really struggle with. I remember when I first started being a therapist and I was going to supervision with one of my supervisors, and I was like, I see what's happening in their life. I see what's hurting them, and it's their own behavior. And I'm too nervous to confront them. Like, I don't want to hurt their feelings. And she said something along the lines of, first, you're doing a disservice by not confronting them. And two, if you don't look at it as confrontation, instead look at it as observing, like you're literally just observing what they're telling you and then regurgitating it back to them, usually clients have the insight to say like, oh, maybe I am, for example, treating women poorly to avoid emotional intimacy.
Yeah.
And I had they really have no idea. And when they realize it, sometimes they're defended. Again, that probably means I'm moving too fast. And sometimes they're a lot more open to it, but it takes time.
Yeah.
Again, there's got to be that trust.
Yeah. And yeah, you just got to go for it. Even if, you're going to be scared too, but like you said, you're doing a disservice if you don't address it.
Right. And that's what makes therapy so fun. It's like you can kind of engage with people and learn what works and learn what doesn't, and they'll tell you what's working and what doesn't, and then you can readjust. It's always a learning curve.
Yeah. I like to tell people, like, when you're going, like, take notes throughout your life, just because, so you know exactly how you're feeling, what you're going through daily, and then regurgitate that back at therapy, because it's hard to remember everything that you've been feeling over the week, or if you only go once a month for just now back again for like 40 minutes or an hour, remember everything you went through.
Totally. And I also ask clients to do that because I think that's a great idea. So again, some of them do, the more avoidant ones do not.
Do you usually leave them with homework every week to try and work on something or something like that?
I'm not big on homework. It depends on some of my clients ask me for homework. If they ask, I'll always give it to them.
Yeah.
But if they don't, I'm really not big on homework, other than writing down what you want to talk about, or if you notice something that we talk about comes up during your week, try to bring it in.
Okay. Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. And I guess we talked a little bit about their willingness to work. And do you usually have to bring in another party into a session with someone, if like a special session or something like that? Have you ever had to do that?
I have had to do that, but it's pretty rare. I'm trying to remember when I have it. Like when I was doing work at a trauma clinic, we would do a lot of family sessions, but those were more expected. Now with my private practice, one of my clients asked to bring in her husband one time, and it was really focused on her confidence and finances and things that he just wasn't understanding.
Okay.
And how it was related to her past and her trauma history and her parents, etc. So that's really the only time that's happened.
Oh. All right, we're gonna be wrapping up a little bit, so
sure.
All right.
My favorite parts. I love when I feel really connected to my clients, when I can like say something like, I noticed you really dismissed me in that moment. What was going on for you? And they can say like, oh, well, I felt you were attacking me. And I can help them process like, do you feel like that was coming from me or from your past? How can we kind of break that down? So I love that. And I also love helping my clients see the strengths in their vulnerabilities. So like in all their symptoms, in their avoidance, in their disconnection, or in their hypervigilance, in their anxiety, like all of that is there to help you survive and cope with the world, this freaking chaos world around us. And that's the whole reason I went into it in the first place. So my clients just feel so validated when they realize that, and it's something they hold on and use to get rid of that negative self-talk.
Oh, that's awesome. I think we need like 1 million more of you. Yeah.
Thanks, JD. Yeah, I love it.
And now you've been in New York through COVID and everything. How optimistic are you for the future of New York City? Just finishing on that. Yeah.
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know. I'm actually moving to North Carolina.
Oh, wow.
I know. Okay. Not because I'm keeping my private practice virtual, not because New York is, I'm actually pretty hopeful for New York. I'm not sure most people say the same, but I feel good about it. Yeah, my partner got into school down there, so we're going together.
Okay.
I'd love to stay, but I got to give it 2 years and then we'll come back. Yeah.
Well, hopefully North Carolina's fun. That's where I was born. So,
Oh, yeah?
I don't know much about it though. I was like born and then shipped away. So yeah, not really.
Oh, I remember us talking about this, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll keep you posted. I don't know much about it either. I've never been.
What part are y'all moving to?
Durham.
Durham. Okay. Nice. All right.
Yeah. So hopefully some like progressives over there, which I know are hard to come by in North Carolina. So
That's what's,
fingers crossed.
that whole region. That's why I don't want to go back to the South.
I'm with you. Temporary.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Well,
Thank you for
thanks for
joining.
having me.
Oh no, it was awesome. I wish I could have had better questions too, to let you ramble on a little more.
Oh no, you were awesome. I hope I didn't ramble too much. I know I get caught up and excited about it, and then I just talk. All right. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. You have a good day. Okay.
All right. You too.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hope you enjoyed that. That's all that we have for you today on a Modern Man podcast. Remember, no more on Monday. I'm coming to you every Wednesday. New podcast every Wednesday, once a week. You can catch me every Friday, Fargo Watch Party with Stephen Merriweather. And then on Mondays, check out Brianna Donnell. If you got anyone that wants to listen to a modern woman speak some real shit, check out Brie. She's gonna have Emily, who I love Emily to death. She's awesome. I think she's gonna have her on there a few episodes. But we're presented to you all by the Modern Podcast Network. Like, subscribe, rate, review. I'll see you next week.